Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Romania's government has collapsed after a historic no-confidence vote, exposing deep tensions over reform, patronage and economic pressure. Prime Minister Ilya Bolojan challenged entrenched systems and paid the price. What happens next could reshape Romania's political balance and its relationship with the European Union. We're joined by Orsolya Ráczová. She's an analyst at the Eurasia group. Welcome to TP World. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Good evening, a pleasure. Now, before we start, there's a short soundbite from the Romanian president that I'd like to play, and then I'll get your view on it.
I understand the expectations Romanians have regarding the functioning of the state and especially corruption. I understand their quality of life concerns, and I will obviously have them in mind in the upcoming discussions with parties about the formation of a new government. We will have a new government within a reasonable time, so I'm ruling out the possibility of pre-term elections. I want to emphasize that at the end of this process, we will have a pro-Western government. We will get through this one step at a time.
Now, that's President Nicolae sounding quite optimistic. Do you share his optimism?
I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't know if you have noticed he used the word pro-Western and not pro-EU. So that's an interesting turn of events because we know that the government that Romania has had up until now has been a very strongly pro-EU government that was working very hard to implement measures and reforms to make sure that Romania complies with the EU requirements, especially on the deficit side. And this is why Romania also avoided sanctions last year. So this is definitely interesting to hear. I'm not that optimistic when it comes to the timeline specifically, and looking at the decision that two of the pro-European parties, the PNL and the USR, has made in the last couple of days, and that is basically them going into opposition. That makes me even less optimistic. So right now, the government scenarios don't seem very good or certain at this point. It's really hard to see how the future government is going to look like, and more importantly, the timeline. We know that there is a 2 months constitutional limit to form a government, and there are two potential tries. Or the president can basically ask someone to form a government twice, or it's two different people. But right now, we don't know who that person will be, and that creates uncertainty.
Certainly, we'll get to that in just a second. But what was under the or behind the vote of no confidence against the PM? I mean, he'd only been in power 10 months. You know, just settling in, and already they have no confidence in him. What happened?
Yes, so there have been tensions between the coalition partners for a long time, basically from the beginning. We have seen these tensions specifically between the PSD, so the socialist coalition partner, and especially Prime Minister Ilya Bolojan. These tensions basically, I think, intensified. The PSD has opposed most of the reform measures, especially the last reform measures, which were more on the structural side. When it comes to the first package, if you remember, back last year around the summer and early fall, those were more technical measures on changing the VAT, some taxation changes, so very technical, which got passed very quickly. But the next reform measures included structural changes, such as reforming the state-owned enterprises, pension systems, changes that affected salaries and pensions of state employees. And this is where most of the tensions has risen between the PSD and the rest of the coalition partners, as the PSD opposed most of these measures. And in the end, they did reach a consensus. And we also saw that some measures were watered down. And especially the last couple of measures were massively delayed on the pension reforms, for example. So during this time, basically all these tensions have intensified, the measures have passed, but basically PSD paid the price because the approval ratings of the PSD have quite dramatically fallen. And I heard that there was a point basically when the PSD had to do something to change this, to turn it over, and this is where basically this no confidence motion came from.
Well, I mean,
we also have to say,
there are reports which are saying yes. I mean, the VAT, for example, and so on. excuse me, did need to be changed because Romania needed to address its deficit issue. However, the 1,200 or so state-owned corporations, which provided the perfect environment ecosystem for patronage, was the one thing that actually brought the Prime Minister down. What would you say to those people who report on this issue?
Yeah, the state-owned enterprises and the reform of them has been one of the main issues. I completely agree with that. And as you say, it's more than 1,000 companies or enterprises that we are talking about. But this is something that had to be reformed. In Romania, there are massive inefficiencies. Then there need to be, some kind of a change. And this is what the EU was asking as well, more efficiency and transparency. And these reform measures were part of that package, that deal. But yes, this was one of the major issues, and I think this is where they did not manage to reach the kind of compromise that the PSD wanted. And this is where we are at this point.
Assuming a replacement Prime Minister is found in the next 2 months, isn't he or she going to face exactly the same problem? Are we talking about some kind of circular issue here?
Yeah, becoming the next prime minister is not going to be an easy task. Exactly as you say, it's going to be the same challenges. Of course, on the plus side, there were already packages passed last year that brought down the deficit, but there is still a deficit target that needs to be met. But on the other hand, we are facing rising inflation, and also the current geopolitical situation complicates it even more. Now we are seeing the pressure of rising energy prices. There are also the security concerns from the Ukrainian war. So this also complicates both the macroeconomic and the security situation. So it is going to be difficult. Plus, the expectation is that Romania continues with the reforms. And it's not just in general to meet the EU guidelines, but also to unlock funding. There is the Recovery and Resilience Fund that Romania is eligible for, but there needs to be reform passed by the end of August to unlock about 7 billion euros. And without a government in place.
And that's going to be one of the major challenges of whoever takes the helm next. Orsolya Ráczová, thank you very much indeed for sharing that analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.